Okay, well, I'm just going to ask you the first question that kind of gets people into thinking about how you make your work. If you can describe the process of how you develop one of your watercolors, and how long does that take? Some of the steps may take a little bit longer, but how does it initially start, and then how does it develop over time?
Well, the things really start when I'm in front of the subject, and something happens. Something tells you this place, this moment, this light is special. Not sure why. So if I'm somewhere where I can work, then I might sit there and paint, and that would be the first stage of developing something that may grow into a larger piece later. If I can't paint, then I at least might make notes, written notes. So I have those resources, and in many cases then I would take digital photographs. So I have a record of some things where I was. And usually that goes away and nothing happens. But when it does continue to kind of haunt you, then I have all those resources, and I can begin to kind of re-establish that moment that drove me to make the painting. If it's possible to return to that place, that's even better, because always working straight from the subject, whether you're painting or working in some other less concrete way, that's the best way to understand what it is about this place. Why do I want to paint this? What should I paint about it? Once the work starts, then drawing, which is for me the foundation of everything I do. Drawing is the first stage, and what a typical drawing for me would be some small little fast sketches, kind of little composition pieces. Starting to sort out, what shall I use, what shall I change, what am I going to need to know something about that I don't know right now. Getting acquainted with the subject in a somewhat more deep way. The drawing ultimately on the watercolor paper will be a line drawing. Sometimes I get carried away with the drawing stage, and it becomes kind of a little shaded thing. Kind of a not finished but developed, modeled drawing, using that term loosely. And then I paint right on top of the graphite. When I give my talk on next week, I'm going to show some examples of that stage leading then on to a finished painting. There's a distance there, a lot of distance, but that gives me the start. So drawing is always. Then when I start painting, if there's a painting like this painting, for example, where there's a lot of soft, big stuff, or a big sky, or some kind of large area that's going to take some very wet paint and a lot of layers of wet paint. That's a high-risk thing. And so I usually try to do that at the beginning, because if I'm going to foul this up, that's probably where I'm going to do that. So rather than spend a long time doing a lot of small detailed things and then wreck it later, I try to do that first. And that's really just kind of a strategic matter. It's not an aesthetic decision so much as just a strategic one. And the paint, I like to use transparent watercolor. And transparent watercolor means you can't hide things. You can't cover them up, and you can't make dark stuff light later. Though there are some, I would say that with an asterisk maybe, because you can back up a little bit. But there needs to be a strategy in mind. How am I going to paint what I want to paint? Meaning I've got to save certain areas, I got to preserve those, I got to paint around them, so they'll be white 5 days from now when I need them to be, or they'll be white so that I can make it light yellow, or something like that. So it's a strategy of building and building. Once the drawing is done, I've kind of located the forms. As I build, I begin to figure out what it is I could do with that. Oh, here's an area that needs something to happen, so I can add and develop that. But I try to make the whole painting come up together as one unified thing, and that's why I think it's crucial when you're working with this area like this. That is a lot of time spent in that area, and while you're doing that, you're not thinking about the whole. So you have to have the whole already captured. You've got to have your arms around that in a way before you get caught up in all those little things. And you've got to constantly back away and try to think again about the whole and not the little pieces. That's just one of the hazards of working in a realist way. The advantage to working in that slow building way, though, is that you come to know what it is you think about it and what's possible and what's there and what you could invent when it isn't there. If I was working more quickly, more impetuously or something, which I do like to do with watercolor also, but in a piece like this, if I'm working slowly, so I'm going to do things I would never have known I was going to do hours and days ago. Typically, a painting like this would take me anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to do. So it's slow. It builds up slowly. Any one area has 5, 6 layers of paint on it to get the color I want, the strength of dark values, for example. Treating edges. I do a lot of work with edges, meaning fuzzing them up, because when you put watercolor on dry paper at the edge of the puddle, it wants to form a hard edge, and a hard edge is kind of the enemy of atmospheric roundness and depth. My head does not have a hard edge on it because it goes on around. It doesn't end right there. So I spend a lot of time after the paint goes on fixing the paint, lifting it off, messing around with it while it's wet and then after it's dry. So eventually it's finished and it sits around now in the studio while I'm doing something else so that I can continue to look at it like this and like this and like this, and pretty soon after 3 or 4 days I'll have another list of things I know I need to do because it wasn't really finished, and I know that I want it to be finished. I want to get on to the next thing, but I know it takes that extra day or 2 of work, and before that day I need to have 2 or 3 days or a week of just contemplating the thing, and so then it's finished.